Well, hey everybody, great to be with you again this week. Hope you're having a wonderful week so far. And hey, that was fun because last week we started something brand new. We launched Vineyard Branches, and we had no less than 6 gatherings or branches meeting or shooting out all over the San Gabriel Valley and online. It was wonderful to see so many of you. We heard nothing but goodness coming from our times together, and more to come in just a few days. Hey, and if you weren't able to participate last weekend, there's still room in our branches. You can go to our website, click on the branches link, get more information, and get signed up. Well, this week we're going to get back to our pre-Easter series from a section of Jesus' teaching known as the Sermon on the Mount. And I, for one, am excited because I kind of missed it. And if you're just jumping in with us, it's a wonderful week to get connected. We're going to just continue to talk about the life and the teachings of Jesus, or as we've been calling it, the way of Jesus. And so today I want to talk a bit about pagan gods, hula hoops, and a divine prayer, a specific divine prayer at that. You know, before Easter, I confessed, I still feel very much like one of Jesus's unnamed disciples in Luke 11, who came to him and said these words, "Lord, teach us to pray, just as John taught his disciples." And so I come today very much in a posture, not just as a teacher, but also as a student. Because I have been, and I continue to ask Jesus to teach me to pray. And you know, I'm learning so many new things. Things that maybe they're not new to you at all, but that's not going to stop me from sharing a couple of them anyway. So here goes. First observation I'd like to make is Jesus' response to his disciples' request. Because his response is, in fact, to teach them a prayer. It's a short prayer, dare I say a prayer many of you watching, you already know by heart. It's a divine prayer, traditionally known throughout church history as the Lord's Prayer. And the prayer he teaches them here in Luke 11, it's actually a more condensed version of a prayer he teaches his followers also in Matthew 6, which is the portion of the Sermon on the Mount we're dealing with this week. Because in Matthew 6, this prayer, it's found right after Jesus instructs his followers how not to pray. He says, don't pray like hypocritical religious people who are prone to these spectacular public prayers offered to be seen by the masses. Yeah, he says, they got their public adulation they wanted, and that was in fact their reward. He also says, don't pray like the babbling pagans who just drone on in long-winded displays of dysfunctional, desperate piety and manipulation. This is likely a reference to a pagan practice of praying to the various gods or the deities in the hopes that at some point one of them, any of them, would wake up and listen. You can actually read evidence in antiquity of these kinds of prayers where people would literally babble a litany of names for different gods, hoping that one of them would choose to care and act on their behalf. And so what a beautiful contrast Jesus gives to that particular mindset. He says, you don't have to impress or manipulate this God with your piety. You don't have to hope that this God will care or will have your best interest in mind. No, he says, this God already knows what you need, even before you ask, and this God can be trusted. This God's actually been having a conversation about you and your best interest for a long, long time, so just feel free to join. And then he actually tells them how to join this conversation. He literally says in Matthew 6, starting in verse 9, "This then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one." Now, I think there's something quite magnificent, dare I say mind-bending, that for nearly 2,000 years, people have recited this exact prayer in hundreds, if not thousands of languages and dialects in both hemispheres on every continent. These exact words have been uttered by billions and billions of lips. And so in many ways, these words in this prayer, it's like the same heartbeat palpitating century after century, filling the church with the very lifeblood of its mission, which must be true because it's coming from the very lifeblood, the source, Jesus himself and his own life of prayer. This prayer, it serves as a lens through which to see the life and the mission of Jesus. These words that he taught, those gathered on that hill, they were part of his own life, part of his breath. And so I hope you can appreciate how this prayer, it's like it reaches down into divine depths far beyond human words. And when we say this prayer, we would do well to perhaps take off our shoes or our sandals, because we are in fact standing on holy ground. Now, I'll get to some of the substance of the prayer in a second, but first I just want to talk about how we approach this prayer. Because in our modern individualistic Western world, when we say, teach us to pray, we might expect that Jesus would then give us some, theories or principles of prayer, maybe like a catchy acronym or 7 habits of highly effective praying. But that's not what Jesus does, nor is that what his original audience would have expected him to do. The expected thing for a first century Jewish rabbi whose disciples had asked for a lesson on prayer would be to give them a prayer, like literally compose a prayer that they could recite. That was likely what John had done or what John had taught his disciples. And so Jesus' followers are like, hey, we want one of those. And the way Jesus taught them was, in fact, not by giving them some principles or a prescribed acronym. He literally says in Luke 11, when you pray, say this, pray these words. And in some individualistic Western religious circles, people don't know exactly what to do with that. So then we turn it into a bunch of principles. Some people may even get nervous feeling like the real spiritual prayers that get God's attention or get God to move on our behalf are actually the more extemporaneous, free-flowing, spirit-led prayers. Like somehow it's more authentic or heartfelt if we just kind of make it up as we go. But according to Jesus, that's not the case. He actually says that can potentially lead to a more hypocritical or pagan way of praying. And could there be anything more spirit-led than the prayer given by the one who was in constant conversation with the Spirit? This is the most spirit-led prayer ever uttered. And I firmly believe that there is something so powerful and so formative in actually using the prayer that Jesus gave us to pray. Again, this is rooted in the reality that you already have this God's attention, that this God knows what you need. So just say this, says Jesus, and he gives us a prayer that can rescue us sometimes from the burden of trying to figure out what to say, a prayer that gives us divine vocabulary. It frees us from thinking we have to say a bunch of right things the right way to get God to do something. Which leads me to the next thing I'm learning about how we approach the concept of prayer in general. If we believe that the primary purpose of prayer is to get God to do what we think God should do, then our prayers will be focused on informing and petitioning God with our requests. Essentially, letting God know what's going on and what we wish would go on. And yet, as our friend Mark Fields reminded us a few weeks back, the more we walk with Jesus and let him teach us how to pray, we find that the primary purpose of prayer, it's not to get what we want from God, but to be formed by the will of God. We become that which is changed. Prayer changes us, in other words. And don't get me wrong. As we turn to the substance of the prayer, there is some definite petitioning and some asking, some crying out, bringing our requests before God. But it's done in a way that it reorders our desires, and it aligns them with the way of Jesus and his kingdom. So let's take a quick look at some of the substance. Because after beginning with worship, by recognizing the hallowed or holy ground we're standing on when we become aware of God's presence, we have the first petition. Oh, and quick side note, notice that the whole thing, it's like in the third person plural, which reminds us once again that we do this together and we join a conversation that's been in progress for thousands of years. And the first petition, it's really the heart of the prayer. It's the heart of the way of Jesus. Jesus says, pray this. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so the church prays that God's kingdom, not ours, would come. That the world God intended, the world as God would have it, that world would be established not someday by and by, but here and now, on earth as it is in heaven, Jesus says. This is the whole will of God. that God's rule and God's reign and God's presence would fill the earth, because when that happens, everything is redeemed. Everything is restored and made whole. Which brings me to hula hoops. A couple weeks ago, we were over at Whitcomb High School, also known as our former Sunday pre-COVID gathering space for those who may have joined us more recently. And we were gathering up a bunch of stuff for our Easter services, stuff that's been stored backstage for the past year or so, and I was gathering a bunch of, chords and music stands when I came across these. Some of you may recall. When years ago, I got inspired to literally make these hula hoops to try to explain the two different spheres of reality that the Bible calls heaven and earth. We talked about how the Bible begins with the complete union of these, or the complete overlap of these two realities. I mean, this is Genesis 1 and 2. God is depicted not as separate and somewhere else, but here. And yeah, while that union or that overlap, it's eventually compromised, not by God, mind you. And while there is a bit of separation or disconnect when humans choose to live contrary to the way things were intended, the rest of the biblical story, it's about how God is at work to literally bring it all back together again, to restore everything to its original goodness, to unite that which sometimes we work so hard to divide. And so at the heart of this prayer that Jesus teaches us is that these two realities would overlap more and more and more here and now. That heaven, would come to earth, that there would be an ever-increasing overlap of these two realities, such that God's will for the restoration and the redemption of all things would fill every nook and cranny of this God-soaked earth. Oh, and we don't have time to go there today, but if you want the answer to the petition Jesus teaches us to pray, the answer to really like the ache or the yearning for this overlap, it's us. It's the church. It's the people of God choosing to live as a pocket of heaven here and now. People who form communities where literally this overlap is occurring. Communities and spaces or branches where healing and hope and connection is an ever-increasing reality. A group of people who are sent out and through whom heaven is invading earth wherever they go. Shane Claiborne, he says it this way as he reflects on all that needs to be restored. He says, there's something powerful that happens when we can connect our faith with the pain of our world. We are concerned not just with going to heaven when we die, but with bringing God's kingdom down here. That means figuring out how we can be a part of the restoration of our world. So this week, as we gather as branches in various neighborhoods and cities in our area, one of the questions that's going to be a part of our conversation is going to be this. As we look at our neighborhoods, what does it mean for us to pray that God's kingdom would come on earth as it is in heaven? So be reflecting on that and come ready with your ideas and your inspirations, because this is really at the heart of what we're all about. And then Jesus instructs us simply to ask for our daily bread. Now, here's the thing. As a parent, I typically know what my kids need before they ask me. And sometimes I know that what they need, it's not that which I know they're coming to ask me for. It's like a third soda. No, kid, you need melatonin. And so Jesus says, just ask for daily bread. Trust that your loving parent knows what you need before you ask. Because what kind of parent would I be if I neglected my children's needs because they did not specify clearly and gratefully what they needed? You said you were hungry. I never heard you say thirsty. You get water tomorrow, maybe. You get the point. We can just pray simply and freely. And sure, we can expand upon the daily bread if we like, but not in some way that assumes that if we forget to ask for the drink, all we're going to get is bread. And then the last substantive part of the prayer that I want to highlight is the petitioning for forgiveness. In light of the forgiveness Jesus assumes we'll offer others. It's as if the prayer, it switches from God being the acting agent, like bringing his kingdom on earth and providing our daily bread, to us being the acting agents. We're given something to do. We forgive those who've sinned against us. It's just another way that heaven and earth overlap. It's the kind of community we're called to be a community that both receives and dispenses forgiveness. This is once again the heartbeat of Jesus himself, who remember his final words, they were filled with mercy and compassion and forgiveness. He says on the cross, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." And sometimes we still don't, right? And so we ask for mercy and compassion and forgiveness as we yearn for reconciliation with God and with each other. So there it is. Some of what I'm learning as I ask Jesus to teach me to pray. A little bit about pagan gods, hula hoops, and a divine prayer. Now, just a few final and hopefully practical thoughts about making this particular prayer a part of your daily prayer life. First, I encourage you to memorize this prayer if you haven't. Many of you, I'm sure you have. Some of you in King James English, and you know that's you if you're praying to the God which art in heaven. The fact that it's such a brief prayer, I think only about 68 words or so, it means that it's easily memorized, it's highly portable, which I think was kind of the point for Jesus' original audience. And then try to pray it daily, even like a few times a day. I started this a while back. I don't know, I've averaged about twice a day, but I got goals for more. And the second practical thought, it's simply this. Use this prayer as a springboard to expand your life of prayer. If your fear is like that it will reduce your extemporaneous praying, then just allow it to do the opposite. I've found there's been absolutely no reduction, only an expansion of my prayer life. And so as I pray it, there are times where I expand upon it with extemporaneous words and requests and adorations and praises, and at other times I just pray it straight through. I trust it's forming something inside of me. And that's the point. That's what Jesus was after with his first disciples. So I trust it's the same for us. So give it a try this week and come ready to pray it together in community as we gather with others in just a few days. Hey, it was great to be with you again this week. Have a wonderful remainder of your week. We do hope to see you this weekend. Grace and peace to you.